Convert the following percents to decimals: 28%, 15%, 1.5%, 1,500%, and 0.3%. We'll do these one at a time, but first we need to talk about what a percent is and how to convert from percents to decimals. So the word percent actually means out of 100. Per means of or out of, and cent means hundred. So a number that's a percent is that number out of 100. If we start by looking at 28%, what that means is 28 out of 100. So we can write that as a fraction if we wanted to. And then if we do this division, either with a calculator or writing everything out, we end up with 0.28 as a decimal. And we don't want to always have to convert it to a fraction and then do the division. So there ends up being a shortcut. And that shortcut involves moving the decimal point. So if you look at the number 28%, whenever you've got a whole number, the decimal point usually isn't written, but it's at the very end. So the decimal point's after the 8. Now, if we divide by 100, this is effectively the same as taking the decimal point and moving it to the left 2 places. And when we do that, it is to the left of the 2. So it starts to the right of the 8, and we move it to the left 2 places. It's to the left of the 2. And we end up with 0.28. So 28% is equal to 0.28. And the shortcut or the rule that we'll use in these situations is to convert from a percent to a decimal, move the decimal point to the left 2 places. This is effectively what we get when we divide by 100. Dividing a number by 100 is the same as moving the decimal point to the left 2 places, but it's much easier to just move the decimal point than to actually go through the division. Let's look at the other examples. If we have 15% and we want to convert that from a percent to a decimal, we need to move the decimal point to the left 2 places. So notice that it starts after the 5 because 15 is a whole number. If we move it to the left 2 places, it needs to go to the left of the 1. And we put a 0 in the front to make it look nicer. And so 15% is equal to 0.15. If we look at 1.5%, the decimal point is starting in a different place. The decimal point starts between the 1 and the 5. And if we want to move it to the left 2 places, we're going to actually need another 0 out front. I'm going to put 2 zeros here so you can see how this works. The decimal point starts between the 1 and the 5, and it moves to the left 2 places, so it goes between those 2 zeros. And so we end up with 0.015 as our answer. Now, for 1500%, this is a bigger percent, so we're going to get a bigger number. The decimal point starts off after that last 0, and we need to move it to the left 2 places. When we do that, it goes between the 5 and the 0, so we get 15.00. But that's the same as just 15, because any zeros after the decimal point are irrelevant. They don't add any value to the number. So in this case, 1500% is equal to 15. Anything that's over 100% is more than a whole, and so it's going to be more than the number 1. So anything less than 100% is going to be less than 1, and anything more than 100% is going to be more than 1. We have one more example to look at here, 0.3%. Now again, we need to move the decimal point to the left 2 places. And to do that, we're going to need some extra zeros. So I'm going to put the extra zeros there. The decimal point starts off between the 0 and the 3. When we move it to the left 2 places, it goes right here between those zeros. And so we end up with 0.003. When we're dealing with percents, we usually want to convert them either to a decimal or a fraction so that we can do mathematics with them. We've talked about arithmetic with fractions and arithmetic with decimals, but not arithmetic with percents, because usually we don't do arithmetic with percents. We convert to a fraction or a decimal first. Now, decimals are not necessarily better than fractions. Fractions are fine. 28 over 100 is fine. It's just as fine as 0.28. But for the problems that we're going to be working on moving forward, we're generally going to be dealing with decimal numbers, especially because we're dealing with money. And so usually when we're dealing with percents, we're going to want to write them as decimals, which is why we look at these examples.